Open Finance Committee meeting to order at 4:57 on Wednesday, October 23rd. Item number 2 on the agenda is 2.1. It's the minutes of September 18th. So
I'll move that. Minutes of September 18th.
Thanks, Your Worship. Seconder, Councillor Norton. All in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. So that's item 2.1. Item 3 is an approval of the agenda.
Move approval.
Motion. Thanks, Your Worship. Seconded by Councillor Radwin. All in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. Item number 4 is disclosure of conflicts of interest, if any. I don't see any, so we'll move on. Item number 6, business matters, the MOU with Uptown St. John, and CFO Fudge, over to you to introduce the topic. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan, members of the Finance Committee. As you're aware, there's considerable value for the city to continue to foster partnerships that drive value for the taxpayer's dollar. In fact, enhancing external partnerships in various services of the organization is a key part of the city's strategy, the 10-year strategic plan. I'm very pleased to have with us today the Executive Director of Uptown St. John, Nancy Tinsington, who oversees the not-for-profit that represents the interest of numerous businesses located within a designated business improvement area in St. John. Ms. Tinsington brought forward an opportunity for the city to partner with Uptown St. John to leverage funds through applications to the Downtown New Brunswick Heart of Communities Investment Initiative. The initiative will allow Uptown St. John to apply for up to $20,000 for capital projects in the Uptown area and $10,000 for planning projects. Before you in your kit, based on collaboration between the city and Uptown St. John, is a proposed memorandum of understanding that would see the city agree to match funding for projects deemed mutually beneficial for the city and Uptown St. John. Annually, the city would work together with Uptown St. John to identify joint projects during the budget process. That would be of value within the BIA to both the City of St. John within the strategic plan, as well as Uptown St. John. If a project is jointly selected, it will be brought forward to Common Council for approval through the normal budget process. And both parties would commit to produce an outcome report for purposes of transparently communicating the results, outcomes, benefits received from the investment. Ms. Tinsington is here today for 2 reasons. One, I wanted her here so I can formally thank her in front of the Finance Committee for her collaboration, but also to be available if the Finance Committee has any questions for her. And so with that, we would recommend the Finance Committee endorse the Memorandum of Understanding and forward it along to Common Council for approval. Thank you.
Thanks, CFO Fudge. Welcome, Nancy, to the meeting. Do any of committee have any questions or comments? Nope. Seems fairly straightforward to me. I'll take a motion. Councillor Norton moving the recommendation. Councillor Radwin seconding. On the motion, all in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. Thanks for being here, Nancy. Thanks for the partnership.
Thank you, Commissioner Fudge, for helping with this. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
The next item is the state of the infrastructure update. Commissioner Fogan, to you to start us off.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, I'm just going to introduce Samir. As the committee is well aware, we've been working on the 5 to 10 year capital plan or investment plan. And one of the things we wanted to see was the impact of the of inflation on that plan. And we know from the capital budget submissions recently that, and actually in last year, we asked for some flexibility in the capital budget in order to deal with some inflationary pressures. And we know we actually had to delay some projects and remove those from completion in that year. So we know we saw the inflationary pressures in the capital budget. we know we should be aware of it in the 10-year capital plan as we started to build it. So our curiosity was built as to, well, I wonder what our state of the infrastructure deficit is right now. And so we put Mr. Samir Yamin onto that, and he's here to show us the results. Samir.
Okay. Thanks, Mr. Fogan. Trying to share my screen here. Thank you, Chairman, Your Worship, and member of the Finance Committee. I'm very happy to share the result of our latest one, 2024 SOTI report, or what you call a State of the Infrastructure report. So we've been doing this report since 2018. We've been doing it every 2 years just to help us to communicate what is the current state of our infrastructure repair. We like communicate to the operation manager, to the staff, to council, as well to the public. And this report has been an effective tool to help us understand where we need to spend our money, what is the high risk of our asset, what is the condition of our asset. And this tool has been a good decision-making tool to help us understand how much money we need to spend for the next whatever years in order to maintain our infrastructure, as well help us to secure some funding through the various level of government and other organizations, and give us a decision-make tool where we need to spend our money to make sure we use our money cost effectively. These are the 4 indicators we measure, we monitor, and we track, which is what is the current placement value of our infrastructure, which could be for both the utility fund as well as the general fund. We're going to look at the condition of our asset, see what is the condition of our asset, which ranges from poor to good condition to excellent conditions. Then we're going to look at the risk, which assets are the highest risk. And lastly, we look at our infrastructure deficit, meaning asset that already surpasses their life, but we don't have the funding and money to replace it. As you know, the SOTI report, or the State of the Infrastructure report, is a data-driven report. So this is important for us. In order to have a good outcome, we need to ensure that our data are accurate and we have confidence in our data. So in order to get the information from our data, we use various sources to get our data. Some of them we get it from the GIS report, which mostly all the linear assets are already mapped into the GIS. Then we go to the Excel. We have an Excel document for now, which we already keep track of all our vertical assets, meaning municipal facility as well as wastewater and water facility. And lastly, we take some data from our financial system, or the Naviline, which is our TCA. However, we went further here, and in order to get more accuracy on our data, we did engage with the engineering to provide us what is the latest cost on our road, on our water line, and et cetera. So there was a lot of assumption here. And most of the data here we get it is we use a lot of useful life data and consequences of failure. So just to give you a snapshot of the result of our finding. Again, so for the general fund here, we estimated that we have over 41,000 number of assets, which is this asset range from road to store sewer to fleet to culvert and other. And our total current replacement value of this asset is close to $2.86 billion. And majority of these assets come from the road, storm sewer, and municipal building, which consists of 86% of our total infrastructure value. And of those assets, 22% are considered poor or very poor condition. 14% of these assets are in a high or extreme risk, with majority of the assets are associated with municipal building as well as the road. And our infrastructure deficit is over $177 million, meaning assets that already surpasses their life. I just want to caution you on this here to indicate that even though our infrastructure deficit is $177 million, we still further investigation and evaluation required to indicate it what asset we need to replace. If this asset, can we extend the life expectancy of the asset by implementing some kind of asset management practice, or this asset are not considered important or useful here, so we can maybe let them die or something like that. So over this, this number, we still need further investigation. Again, we have to look at how much money we need to spend over the next 20 years, and also to determine what is our capital expenditure we need to maintain over the next 20 years to maintain our infrastructure, our asset. And please also, just to caution you here, the capital investment does not include any new asset here. So we estimated that over the 20 years, by taking into consideration our deficit in 2024, requires $37.40 million annually to maintain this asset. However, again, a further investigation analysis still required to identify what is the exact amount we need to maintain this asset. The next one is the utility fund. At the utility fund, we identified over 33,000 number of assets, which is very significant. And our total current replacement value is close to $4 billion. And majority of this replacement value come from water line and from our wastewater facility and sewer here. Of those assets, 11% of these assets are poor or in very poor condition, and 9% of are high or extreme risk. And of those here, we have over $360 million in our infrastructure deficit. Again, on the utility fund here, we develop a 20-year capital expenditure forecast, looking at how much we need to how much capital investment we require to maintain over the next 22 years by taking into our consideration the deficit we have it in 2024, and we estimate it to be a $40.8 million capital investment required for the next 20 years. And I'm gonna talk about why is the difference compared to 2022 year. This will just give you a summary of our asset. And so we're looking at both the general and utility fund. We find that our current replacement value is close to $6.86 billion, which for me is considered is very significant. We have a significant infrastructure for City of St. John. To be honest with you, we can combine both Moncton and Fredericton, and still does not manage maintain come to the closer to the $6.86 billion. Our infrastructure deficit is $545 million, and which is represent percentage of 7.9% of our infrastructure. Of those assets, we have 11% at the high risk and 15% are poor or very poor condition. And our annual capital expenditure we need required for both the general and the utility is close to $78.2 million for the next 20 years annually. So what we did here, we always do a comparison between every last year compared to this year. So the last time we did the report was in 2022, and we're looking at the replacement current replacement value. It jumped by $1.01 billion. And the reason, most of the reason of this jumping from 2022 to 2024 is basically most inflation and new infrastructure. The same thing on the infrastructure deficit, we see a $78 million deficit. However, when we take into consideration this increase in deficit, when looking at the ratio of percentage, we find out that we see a deficit by 0.9%, which is acceptable for us. However, at the high risk, we see that our high risk asset has decreased by 1%, which give to me that indications that the city is taking using a prioritized and high risk and strategy in order to reduce the high risk asset here. And our risk and our capital investment for the next 20 years is estimated to increase by $12 million again, and this due to inflation and new infrastructure. And then what we did here for the utility is what we said here. We see an increase which is double our replacement value by $22 billion, and we see our infrastructure deficit went down for $121 million. I just want to caution you on that. Is the reason went down for one reason actually is in the past when we did 2022 here, we did estimated We didn't include, we assume that combined sewer storm are in a deficit because they don't meet the regulation. However, in 2022, 2024, we took a different strategy by using the useful life instead of for the combined sewer storm instead of using the regulation, which has reduced our infrastructure deficit by minus 40.8% here. And our poor and condition remain the same. Our high risk has increased by 0.1% here, and capital investment had increased by $14 million. What's driving the large increase? And we did a lot of research, and we went back on some of the Canadian statistics, and we look at the construction for facility using some statistics, and we find out that from 2022 to 2024, we see increase in the facility retrofit renovation over 34%. And based also on the information we receive from the engineering on the water main and road, stuff like that, we find there's an increase of 166% and for the road 67%. And I think the indication we get right now in 24, we start to see a stabilize on our inflation. So where are the high risk right now in the category? When it's come to the building, our major risk is, and 78% of our capital is investment in the next 10 to 20 years. We need to spend it on Market Square, on the TD Station, and the Canada Game Aquatic Center. Also, on the high risk, also on the general fund, we're looking at road also is an area, and also the arena, especially now the arena, they are to the end of their useful life the next 4 years. Then hopefully by the time we'll have the multiplex around that. On the utility fund here, this issue we have in the high risk is the water transmission main. And this is becoming very important for us because when we did the SOTI report, we based on useful life here. We have not done a condition assessment, and it is one area we need to look at it in the future here is to develop some kind of methodology and to assess the condition of this linear asset, especially on water transmission line, to ensure that there's no failure. And we don't want to be in a situation what happened in Calgary when they lost their water main. Something we have to look at it seriously. And this is one of the high risk we're going to look at it. As well, we're going to look at some of our wastewater and water station. In conclusion here, yes, we see a significant cost to maintain our municipal infrastructure. And the reason for this increased cost is due to inflation here. And we surely need to consider this one very seriously when we start looking at our capital investment. Overall, the state of the repair, it is stable. What we see some degrading slightly, but since 2022, but it's not something very important right now. Overall, confidence is fair. There's still uncertainty exists in some key of the asset, which I spoke about early in the previous slide. Going forward here, we need to improve our data quality, especially when it comes to water and wastewater facility. We lack some data on this wastewater facility, and I know we have in the capital program some funding available to do more condition assessment on our water and wastewater facility. Another area of concern is the water transmission risk. We need to look at a methodology for us to do a condition, especially on our main water transmission risk here, to identify when we need to replace this asset before they fail. And one we're looking also next year is a park and outdoor recreation facility, which we need to improve our data. Thanks everyone for the presentation. Thank you very much here. If anybody has any question, I'll be happy to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Yamin. If you could stop sharing your screen, I can see everybody. And to committee, are any questions or comments on the presentation? Your Worship, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. Samir, you do an amazing job, but when I read through that, it's overwhelming, the numbers, when I look at them all. 41,000, the number of assets, almost 3 billion replacement value, 14% at extreme risk. And it looks like we're almost up to 500,000 at infrastructure deficit with the two together. So I know that with you at the helm, we can tackle this. So I'm confident, but the numbers are huge. And when you say that Moncton and Fredericton are still smaller together than what all of this would be, it's a lot. And I guess it's also important for the public to understand that at 315 square kilometers and, hills and everything else that we have for lift stations, et cetera, it's really great information. So, it's great in the kit tonight, and really great to have it here. And thank you and for all you do for the city, because I know that's a big job managing all that infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Roshia. I just want to acknowledge here, I have with me here Bill Neal, is the Corporate Asset Management Coordinator. As well, I have Mike Benson from DCA Consultant, who help us with this report here. Thank you very much. I want to thank both of them on that.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks to the team. Councillor Radwin, to you.
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. I have a comment, quick question. I was really nerding out on all of these numbers, let me tell you. But incredible to see infrastructure deficit increasing from 247 million to 367 million in only 2 years. That is significant. And then it's also concerning that $196 million of the infrastructure is in extremely bad condition, with another $211 million of infrastructure at high risk. So I guess that, it's a little worrisome. And when you're talking and comparing us to Moncton and Fredericton, it makes me think, tax reform. We desperately need that. And hopefully with the new provincial government in, we'll start to see some rapid movement there. But I'm also kind of wondering, how, obviously there's so many things at risk of, having some major repairs that would need to be done and such, and maybe repurchases and things like that. So how do we know, for these ones that are really high risk, how many years out are we before we end up having some major repair that we have to do, or, obviously we're trying to save some money. We're doing a good job at that, but, what does it really mean in the short term?
Yeah, I mean, again, for example, some of the data we have on the building, on the condition, we have a condition assessment, which we feel confidence. However, those assets which are based on useful life, which we don't have condition assessment, I'll be concerned on that. And that's why when we look at this asset, especially the water main, we use the useful life on that. So what happened here? So we assume this mean after it's gonna fail. If this fails, it's gonna. So for us, we need to do more condition assessment, more investigation, more assessment, and look at this. Maybe we can expand it 10 years, and then the high risk of asset will go down more when we understand more the condition. However, the only thing what we do here is this is a data-driven report, and whatever data we have, whatever condition rating system we use, whatever risk rating we use in this methodology to develop this data. However, again, as I said previously in the beginning, we need to take this in consciously that more evaluation and analysis needed for us to move forward on that. I don't know if I did answer.
Yeah, Director, I think you've done a good job at answering it. It's a little bit worrisome, but I think that's why we have to really be mindful of keeping reserves, and thank goodness we're doing that now. The other big thing is that the previous council had and they're all here actually, previous council, you guys did an Ernst & Young report, and one of the recommendations was to sell off some asset, and this is potentially why, because there was that big factor of look at all the risks that are involved when you're hanging on to certain infrastructure, but obviously there's reasons to do so. But thank you very much. That's great insight, amazing numbers. If anybody wants to geek out, I highly recommend taking a look because these numbers are really interesting.
Thanks, Councillor Redmond. Councillor Norton?
Thank you, Chair Sullivan. Samir, thanks. It's incredible how much money we bury. So
Yeah.
It always, I guess, it amazes me how much of our infrastructure is unseen, and as a result, how much buried gold we have out there. So, a city doesn't move without it, and it's something always good to remind not only committee about, but those that we're trusted to care for their precious tax dollars. That although you may not see it by investing in that infrastructure, it's not only the most costly, but in some respects it's the most important. And I think we've often heard they're sometimes not considered the sexiest of investments, but they're absolutely critical if you don't have them. And I guess another good reminder, sometimes I wonder with Finance Committee if we should go back and periodically review our values. But number 4, when you take good care of your property, amongst some other good ones that the commissioner had presented, I remember that meeting well, but take control of your expenses before they take control of you, or fix the roof before you buy new living room furniture. But Samir, I guess just from my wheelhouse to you, take good care of your property is what this is all about before your money takes control of you. You've got to take control of those assets. So I guess that's exactly what this is doing in a data informed approach. So really good. The only other thing I would say, and I'm not here to give work, but it'd be a really powerful infographic if this presentation could somehow be available for distribution beyond the large audience that we might be having right now. It would be really good to send that out there in some bite-sized chunks, just to give some representation about how our assets are from an infrastructure sense, and what the state of those are. It's just really good. So I always enjoy how you present, and you make it consumable. So thank you, Samir.
Thanks, Councillor. My 2 cents. Samir, you mentioned Calgary, and that's my big concern is really on the utility side. We're getting better at longer term plans and working on long-term capital plans on the operating side, and the utility just kind of takes care of itself, so to speak, and out of their ratepayer operating budget. And I know coming a little bit down the agenda is recommendation to hold rates for another year on the utility side. But at some point in time, and really this is for Finance Committee to consider and staff, do we start? We're doing a good job of maintaining our rates and maintaining our year to year, but where most of our capital expenses on the utility side come from pay as you go, at what point in time do we start to look at very modest increases in our utility rates in order to tackle some of this deficit so that we don't have a Calgary, right? So, I don't think that's necessarily for this year, but when you're building assets that, last from Lincoln till now, Your Worship, we want to make sure that we're planning ahead as well. So I'll just plant that seed. Mr. Fogan, I see your hand is up. Go ahead.
Sure, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to let the committee know and assure them a little bit that on our capital budget, we do recommend, obviously, work on the assets that we consider the highest risk and what we know. In past budgets, we have presented information on leak detection, for example. So Mr. Yamin is perfectly correct in that we don't know exactly the condition of some of those transmission mains. So that's why they're listed as high risk. But we do leak detection, and and your capital budget does cover off what we consider some of the highest risk ones that we're facing year to year. Having said that, we're spending about 14 million on your utility capital budget, and Samir just presented that the requirements are around 40 million. Yeah.
Thank you, CFO Fudge.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add just a couple more comments for context. I think I've heard a councillor, one of the councillors say this would be a great infographic. I think it's Councillor Norton. I heard Councillor Radwan mention municipal reform. Absolutely bang on. If you ever want to paint a picture for the need of municipal reform, put forward this presentation. I just want to talk a little bit about just to put it into context. So it's taken the city about 10 years to reduce our debt by $50 million. 10 years to reduce our debt by $50 million. And this presentation is showing we have around a $30 million gap in infrastructure. So if we were to try to fund that through debt, within 2 years, we'd be back to the year 2015 in our debt position, which is not where we need to go or want to go. If you're trying to address that through tax rate increases, you're looking at 13-cent tax rate increase to address that type of gap. So the bottom line is the city cannot solve this on its own with the sheer size of the infrastructure the city has that we have to take care of. And this is the primary reason why the city has supported UMNB's call for additional funding for municipalities of $200 million. It's another reason why the City of St. John has continuously requested that heavy industrial property tax remain local and for the province to transfer that tax back to municipalities. And it's another reason for why we've been consistent in our call for more control over our property tax rate structure and flexibility with respect to that. Thank you.
Thanks. Councillor Norton?
Sorry, apologies, Mr. Chair. I forgot to take down my electronic hand.
No worries. This is a receive and file, I do believe. CFO Fudge, yeah?
Yes, it is. CAO McGovern has his hand up as well.
Oh, yes, go ahead, CAO.
Thank you. Good afternoon. A number of points have been, I think, already well covered, with respect to fiscal reform and UNB's research, that has really showed there's a fiscal gap. I think anyone who looks at the finances and fiscal reform, it clearly shows that there is a gap in terms of municipal funding. So this just, I think, is more proof that there is a gap there, and that's already been covered. I just did want to touch on, to your point, Chair Sullivan, in terms of the question as it relates to looking at increases for the utility. We will be back before the end of this year with the long-term financial plan for the utility. And so as part of that, we should be looking at, what sort of transition there is in our rate structure to actually address, the question that you've raised. So that's something that we're mindful of and we'll be looking at as part of that as well.
Okay, thank you. So on the receive and file, motion and a seconder.
Move.
Thanks, Your Worship. Councillor Norton. On the question, all in favor, signify by saying aye, raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. The 2025 draft general fund operating budget, CFO Fudge.
Thanks again. We are kickstarting this afternoon discussion on the operating budget for 2025. First, with this presentation that Mr. Levine will deliver this afternoon to the Finance Committee for the General Fund, and then the next item, Mr. Fogan will deliver the first presentation on St. John Water's 2025 operating budget. Mr. Levine's presentation is very high level. It's very early days. We still do not have any assessment-based growth information or any equalization grant information. It's based primarily on a status quo service level that's being assumed for this first version. The budget's based on a break-even analysis on what the tax base growth would need to be just to break even, or to balance, I should use the word balance, to balance the budget on the assumption of a status quo budget. So Mr. Levine will walk you through that. In addition, for the first time in years, you have in your kit as ancillary information service-based budget templates that have been completed by key front-level service areas that will provide the Finance Committee with very important insight on the number of employees in each service area, the amount of goods and services within those service areas, the primary activities that are taking place in those service areas, as well as in some templates, the targeted service levels that they're desiring to meet based on the approved funding that they've received in 2024. And why these documents will be very important for the Finance Committee in future meetings is when the final budget's brought forward with, service enhancement requests or recommendations in those service areas, the commissioners will be able to describe how the proposed enhancement or the budget investment will increase the service level or the activities that are described on their service-based template. So it's giving the Finance Committee a new lens on how to review and assess the budget that's being brought before you. It also would be remiss not to say that this has been an extremely large undertaking by each of the service areas, and is actually the first step to the city having a greater understanding on how to evolve to a performance-based framework. I want to thank CAO McGovern for his support on the process, all the commissioners and directors and the employees who put work into completing the templates for the Finance Committee, along with our corporate performance team, including our CIO, Stephanie Rackley-Roach, and a really massive lift by our manager of corporate performance, Evelyn Hatfield, and performance specialist, Marco Ahern, who created the templates, provided the support to the service areas to complete the service-based budgets. The service-based budgets are not being presented in detail this afternoon to the Finance Committee. However, commissioners are in attendance for this meeting. Should anyone on the Finance Committee have any questions on any of the templates included in your kit this afternoon, the commissioners can, or Mr. Levine or myself can address your questions. And with that, I'll turn the presentation over to Mr. Levine. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, CFO Fudge. I see my presentation okay, Mr. Chair?
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, thanks again, CFO Fudge and members of the Finance Committee. CFO stated this will be a high-level overview of the 2025 General Fund operating budget. Staff will be back to the Finance Committee on November 20th with a final draft with our updated tax-based numbers along with various service enhancements for consideration. And I just want to highlight again, as CFO has stated, that the kit includes several service-based budget documents that will give users a better understanding of the services and activities that the various service areas provide. The draft budget being presented is a balanced budget. In order to balance this budget, the city would need a 4.25% tax, property tax increase. There is a reduction in this draft budget of $1 million in the unconditional grant for 2025, and that is based on the loss of core funding that was announced in 2022. And again, however, this figure will be confirmed once our assessments are posted. There is new revenue included in this draft budget, and the majority of it coming from the Housing Accelerator Fund, just to cover the cost of that program that has been implemented this year.
Craig, I apologize for interrupting. We don't see your slides moving. I'm not sure if you're intending to be on the first slide.
I'm moving now, Kevin?
No, all I see is the very first title page of your presentation.
Try that again.
Yeah, so we can see your slide deck. It's not the full screen, but we can see, there you go.
And is it now moving?
It is now moving, yes. Thank
Perfect.
you.
Appreciate that. Thank you. Other assumptions that were built in this draft, CFO alluded to, service levels are relatively the same as 2024. And much of the increases in services is related to inflationary, which is, really based on the last 2 months, has really started to come down. So we hope that we start to see that trend normalize throughout the next year. And as I stated in the previous slide, additional funding enhancements will be brought forward as part of the draft on November 20th. So here's just a snapshot of the overall revenue for 2024, with revenues coming in at just over $194 million. And again, on the flip side, you'll see the breakdown for the service areas equal to the same amount. So for this draft budget, there's an overall increase of just over 3.69% in revenue over 2024. And again, that's assuming the 4.25% in property tax, along with the $1 million reduction in unconditional grant. I also want to highlight that our prior year surplus is $2 million less than it was in 2024. Revenue from owned sources increasing by just over $3.48 million. Again, the largest driver of that is the funding from the Housing Accelerator Fund, as well as wage recovery for workers' comp, and then the balance being overall minor increases in various revenue line items. Here's the growth in services with an overall increase of just over $3.2 million. Again, the increase is largely due to the new service area that is funded through HAF. As well as I do want to highlight that there's a new operating grant for $400,000 included in this draft budget now that Industrial Parks is a standalone entity. There's also no additional temporary manager funded for the Pro Kids. And lastly, I want to highlight that if anyone's looking at the reduction in dangerous and vacant building program, that really relates to the decreased cost and demolition, and it's not reflective at all of any decrease in enforcement efforts. Public Works and Transportation Services. The largest driver of the increase in goods and services relates to the transit operating subsidy, which is expected to increase by just over $753,000. And this is largely due to increased costs of fuel and parts. Parks will see an additional significant increase, and this is really related to the additional security cost and maintenance for our new gathering space here at the Market Slip. The budget also includes asphalt overlay for a limited number of streets. Public safety increase really is wages and benefits. This draft does include the additional 4 police officers that have been requested as part of the budget process. For strategic services, very little change in utilities and infrastructure, with general inflationary increases, along with the biannual ortho photography program. I spoke to CFO Fudge earlier. There was some back and forth of whether this may be eliminated as part of the passing of the Fundy Regional Service Mission budget, but I'm being told that's probably not going to happen, so there'll be no change in what I'm presenting here today. For strategic services, minor inflationary items, along with some external services that is not needed for 2025. Under corporate services, you do see a reduction in the goods and services, but as I stated earlier, the St. John Industrial Parks is no longer a city department, but a standalone entity that will be funded through an operating grant. There is a significant increase in our HR budget, really to do with increased training, recruitment costs, along with a reallocation of expenses that came from other service areas that were just coordinated into one budget item under HR. Other charges, good news, we do have a reduction in our principal and interest charges of just over $1.2 million. Our transfer to capital is a bit lower this year, really to do with the smaller surplus, but we are still budgeting for the $3 million to be transferred in for the new recreation facility. So in conclusion, there are several items outstanding in order to bring forward a complete draft. As presented, the city needs 4.25% tax base growth, and in order to balance, and we'll need higher than that, obviously, to consider further enhancements. As I stated earlier, we'll be bringing forward a draft operating budget to the Finance Committee on November 20th. And with that, the recommendation is to receive and file this presentation and direct any questions to staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. Questions from committee? Councillor Radwin, go ahead.
Of course, Chair. Thank you for that, Craig Levine. That was great. I do have a bunch of questions for staff, but I've kind of sent them off in emails, and so we'll deal with that once we're kind of getting a little more detail. But I do want to say that I am anxious to see what assessments will show, and just so that staff knows, my general feeling is I'm mostly interested in not putting a heavy tax burden onto residents. So, I mean, tax reform could certainly help that with all of the increases that we're feeling. But anyway, that's kind of where I sit right now. The other thing is I'm happy to see things like the overlay program that I think is desperately needed, and the community development officer position put back into that. And I see it posted as well for the east side, so that's very exciting. One of the most alarming numbers in all of these sort of assessments was the 29, that Mayor Rudin will like this one, the 29,000 flowers that staff are planting. And they're so beautiful. They look absolutely gorgeous, and they make the city look so beautiful, but I just can't help but think, can we not invest in annuals? And so I've kind of sent that off in one of my emails. And I think it's not about, I'm not looking to get rid of staff. But I think that in my mind, staff could maybe be starting a vegetation management plan, because I get a whole lot of requests for, we need to clear off this side of the road and such. So that's personally what I'd like to see, is for us to do a little bit of rigging over there and making those investments. So maybe not this year for the vegetation management plan, but we could plan in the future years after these annuals start coming up all the time. Not that we can't have some pre-annuals, but because, people are still loving their tulips, but really it's important that we're really strategic in our investments. So thank you, Chair. That's great. And I'll look forward to having more detailed discussion in the next little while.
Thank you, Councillor. Your Worship, to you.
I'll move the recommendation. And I'll just say quickly that, I agree with Councillor Radwan that it's hard to put up that burden onto residential. So if you're not going to do that, it means dropping the tax rate. If you do that, you don't have money to spend somewhere else. So it's always that balance. I certainly get the perennials versus annuals as well. But the perennials, they take a lot of work, I notice, on Harbour Passage. So it's always a balance, but they have looked great this year. So it's, like I said, it's difficult when you're in this seat to try to figure out where you're going to spend that money. You do want to try to reduce that burden, and but we know as we go forward, we need to keep providing those services. So we'll struggle with that, but I think that this budget is great. I think there's lots of things in there that we've all asked for. I find it strategic, so really happy to have it. Thanks to staff.
Thanks, Your Worship. Councillor Norton, did you like an opportunity? You're good.
I'm good. Happy to support the recommendation. So.
Okay, thanks. That was seconded by Councillor Radwin. Lots of conversation about the flowers. I'm going to try to stay out of the weeds here. It's a status quo budget that we're starting at, and this is our starting point for folks who are watching at home. So thank you for staff from across the organization and certainly within finance for getting us this base. It is a bit of a caution, though. If we just want to do what we plan to do, this isn't with any service enhancements, this isn't with any changes, it's still requiring a 4.25% increase in our tax base. And most people who are watching, or if you're watching, you're probably tuned in, but when you're talking to your friends, that's 4.25% average. And we know over the past couple of years, it's been very unbalanced, that the residential assessment growth has been much greater than the business growth. And the heavy industry growth. So it's a good base so that we know when that assessment information comes in from Fredericton, hopefully, within the next couple of weeks, that we'll be able to start making adjustments from there. I reviewed yesterday and today the conversation that our council had with the party leaders, and of course, in particular, with our premier designate. And this just emphasizes how important it is to get on that conversation around fiscal reform in municipalities. And, hopefully pieces of that can come sooner. I know it's a big job to get done for budget 2026, but maybe there are some things that could be done to help relieve some of the pressure that residents will feel because of that imbalance in assessment while it gets worked on. So that would be my 2 cents. It is a receive and file. We've got the motion on the floor. So I'll call the question on the motion. All in favor of the receive and file, signify saying aye, raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. I'm sure as the details come out, we start talking about the potential service enhancements and certainly the assessment information. We will then start to get more into the weeds and the flowers. So thanks for that one. We will move on. And the last item on the agenda is our operating budget for the utility. And to that, we're going to Commissioner Fogan.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll bring the presentation up here to share it with everybody. And trying to get it to play. There we go.
Yep.
All right, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, so this is just a brief overview of the St. John Waters draft operating budget for 2025. And you have most of this you have this in the kit, so I'm not going to go over in detail the numbers. I'll bore you to death by reading the numbers off loud, so I won't do that. But just a note here on this one that as you know, the industrial water budget, it gets presented separately through bylaw rates. It pays for itself and has no impact on the potable rate. So it's currently being calculated for 2025, but this is separate from the industrial rates. So for our revenue overall, we do see an increase in revenue as what's in your kit here for a little over $3 million from 2024. Just as a highlight for that, we're holding the rates as they are, so there's no rate increase. The annual flat rate will remain at $14.28. This has been held now for 7 consecutive years. And there's no rate increase for commercial potable customers either. The meter consumption of fixed charges will remain the same. And meter revenue, we are seeing an increase of almost 22% year over year, with the largest increase coming from a large industrial customer who's consuming a large amount of potable water for the next 5 years. And there's also a conversion of a mobile home park that has gone from flat rate to metered customers. So there is a reduction in flat rate revenue over to meter revenue. And other revenue increases are largely attributed to interest revenues due to higher interest rates. And this is considered a non-reoccurring and is offset by increasing capital from operating for 2025. On the counter side of that, we'll have the expenditures match the revenues, which we will see the same corresponding increase. And as we noted before, the industrial water budget is under development. Our debt charges have decreased by approximately $600,000 due to debt retirement, and no borrowing has incurred since 2017. And pay-as-you-go was increased by $2.5 million over the previous year into that important capital bucket, which we talked about earlier tonight. Some other highlights and to note is we are doing some leak detection in the entire east water distribution system, and we will be repairing those identified leaks to minimize water loss and improve the water system efficiency and reliability. Next year, we'll also be doing unidirectional flushing on the west side to ensure high quality drinking water. Annually, we also look at fire hydrants. Just as an FYI, we have over 2,100 in inventory, and we hope to cover off a quarter of those, or a third of them in inspect, and 25% of them to paint. And wastewater collection, we are increasing funding for trenchless technology, which will help eliminate leaks, but also reduces the need to excavate pipes and repair and reinstate asphalt. So a little higher service level to citizens and a little less repairs on the road from doing trenchless technology repairs. Further highlights is our water tanks. We have conducted some initial inspections in 2024, and we'll be starting a preliminary rehabilitation of our water tank system starting in 2025. And in wastewater treatment, we are increasing funding to improve the dissolved oxygen monitoring at the Lancaster Lagoon to optimize the utilization of the blower system. And on the safety side, we are continuing to increase our efforts to improve our standard operating procedures with a focus on safety with the assistance of the new field safety officer who started in 2024 and our various consultants. So in conclusion, we are seeing some temporary increases in potable meter revenue, which will be directed towards our infrastructure deficit. The utility is balancing the need to replace aging infrastructure to support growth with the need to replace infrastructure to ensure service levels can be met. We're examining opportunities for revenue increases within existing service areas. And we do feel that holding rates is equivalent to a rate decrease when accounting for the increases in expenses. In just simply on the capital side, as you saw, we see that some supplies and materials have doubled in cost since 2019. And the long-term financial plan we brought forward before the end of the year and will incorporate the increases in infrastructure deficit based on the 2024 SOTI report, which we saw earlier tonight, and we'll discuss potential rate increases in the use of borrowing in the future years. And with that, you have our recommendation for receive and file. I'll stop sharing. Any questions?
Thanks, Commissioner. Questions from committee? Going once, going twice. Gone.
I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you, Your Worship. Seconder. Thanks, Councillor Norton, for seconding that. Yeah, no questions from me, Commissioner. We talked earlier, and you mentioned in your slide deck about long-term financial plan and planning a little more capital for the future, certainly. And Justin, I know you and I have talked about it, so just so folks who are watching at home don't think it's been forgotten. In the long-term plan is still a conversion to universal metering, and that is not lost on staff and is still working in the background as well. So for the receive and file, on the motion, on the question, all in favor signify by saying aye or raising your hand. Contrary minded, carried. And just before we adjourn, the one member who isn't with us right now is Councillor Hickey. He's still Councillor Hickey, but we do want to wish him well. He has been very helpful, a very important addition to the Finance Committee. I'm sure more will be said about Council later on. But from my seat as Chair of Finance, really appreciated having Councillor Hickey along, and looking forward to having his financial voice in Fredericton with the knowledge that he has from working with us, and look forward to whoever our new committee member is that will join us in the future. For those of you just tuned in late, we had a brief but very good conversation about a partnership with Uptown St. John, and then really kicked off and got into conversations about our assets, our deficit, infrastructure deficit, and that cautionary tale as we go into our plans for our initial looks at operating and utility budgets for next year. So really, tonight's been a conversation starter, if anything. Thanks to staff for their support. Thanks to staff from across the organization for being here as we get into budgets, and to the committee members for your continued work. And with all of that, I'll take a motion to adjourn.
Move motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Councillor Norton. Beat you to it, but I'll take you second there, Your
Sounds
Worship.
good.
And on